Hello everyone, DaveDev here. Welcome to this video. In today's lesson, we will take a look at how to declare and use functions, add arguments to them, and return a value after the execution of the function. What are functions? Functions are one of the most useful and powerful tools that we can use in programming. Function is basically a block of code that we can use as many times as we want in our application. You can define a function by using the function keyword followed by the name of the function that you want to use. I recommend that you give them a name that reflects the code inside of it, so it is easier to you to understand when you or someone else goes through the code later on. After the name, you place an open and close parenthesis where you will specify the arguments of the function. I will explain that later on. And after the parenthesis, you specify the open and closing curly brackets where you will place the block of code that you want to execute when the function is called. And for calling the function, you just need to use the same name that you specify in the function definition, followed by the brackets and then a semicolon. Every time you write that call of the function, it will execute the code block that is defined inside of the function. As you can see here, we have defined the hello world function, which it prints a hello world message. You can also pass information to your function through arguments, which are just variables that you can specify. You can specify the arguments inside of the parentheses when defining the function, and you can add as many as you want as long as you separate them with a comma. As you can see here, we are passing two different values as arguments every time we call the function, which will give us different results based on the arguments we gave. The first argument is a message, and the second argument is a value. And in our function, we are printing the message and the value. Later on, we are calling the function with different parameters for each call. And as you can see, it is resulting with different message printed. In the example, we specified two arguments without specifying the type. This means that the function will accept any kind of data that we pass. And even though this gives you more flexibility, there will be some cases where you want to force the arguments to be of a particular data type. You can do that by specifying the data type just before the argument of the function. This will force the user to specify a valid data type when using the function. And if that is not the case, the application will throw an error and stop the execution. Something to note here is that this feature was released on PHP version 7, so if you are using a previous version, you won't be able to use this feature. As you can see in this case, I am specifying a function which will take two arguments. The first argument is a string, and the second argument is an integer. And at the moment of the call, we have to specify the arguments as the data type specified. In our case, the first one is a string and the second one is an integer. There are some cases where we do not require all of the arguments to be passed because they are optionals and up to the user to use if they require it. By specifying a default value on the argument declaration, we are saying that if the user does not specify a value, the default value will be used instead. We can specify a default value after the argument declaration, writing the equal symbol and then the value that we want to specify. And after this, we can just do a call of the function without the need of specifying all the arguments of the function. As you can see, we only specify the first argument, which is hello, which is the string, but the second argument is being set by the default value of the function argument, which is 4. Another thing to note here is that you can only specify a default value from left to right, meaning that if you want one argument to have a default value, you will need to define the default values of the arguments after that one as well, as PHP will not know which arguments are default and which ones are not. Let's say that we wanted this function to have this default value. So the first parameter has a default value, but the second one doesn't. As you can see, it's complaining because it doesn't know which argument is the default and which one is not. So in order to have the first one default, we have to also specify the second one as default. So if we do this, now if we don't specify one parameter, it will be all right. But if we specify the first parameter, it will also work. Another nice feature functions have is that you can return a value after the function has been executed and use it in another part of your code. This can be done by specifying the return keyword at the end of the function code block, followed by the value or variable that you want to return. As you saw here, we have declared a function that sums two arguments given and return the result of the operation. We call the function passing 2 and 3 and then storing the resulting value in a variable that we later on print. The same way that we declare the data type of the argument of the function, we can specify what data type the function is going to return. This is very handy for the user to know beforehand what to expect when using a particular function. You can do that by just specifying a colon followed by the data type in the middle between the brackets and the curly brackets. The same as before, this feature was brought to PHP in version 7, so bear that in mind if you want to use it. Functions in PHP receive the arguments and store them as a copy that you can use inside of the function. But the actual variables used will remain the same even if you modify the arguments inside of the function. We have created a function that is theoretically modifying the argument that we have passed. And this argument is the variable that we are using over here, which has the value of 1, and then we call the function and then we print it. So in theory, we should have the variable starting with the value 1, and then after using this function, the value should be 10 as we specified here. As you can see, the value has not changed. This is because the variable is being copied into the argument. However, what if we would like to directly modify this variable that was given to the function? Thankfully, we have a feature called passing by reference. Let me explain first what a reference is. It's a little bit advanced programming knowledge, but I will try to explain. A reference is a type of variable that doesn't contain the data, but the address where the data is actually stored. You can then use this reference to access and modify the data without actually having the stored variable. Going back to passing by reference, what this will do in case of the function is that we are passing the address of the variable that we are using in the function call. Therefore, we are giving read and write access to the function, being able to modify the variable inside of it, even though the actual variable lives outside of the function. And as you can see now, the variable has changed from 1 to 10 because we have passed this by reference. You can specify this behavior by writing the ampersand just before the argument declaration in the function. You may think this is not a very useful tool if we can return values from function. However, returning values is quite limited, as if you hadn't noticed, you can only return one value at a time. And if you want to return more than one, you can either get very imaginative with the return value or quite easier to store values in the argument passed by reference. As you can see here, we have a function which takes two arguments that are passed by reference, meaning that the function will have read and write access to those variables. The variables are living outside of the function and we are passing them when the function gets called, and then we're printing it. And in here you can see that the values of those two variables have changed. There is another very interesting feature in PHP called anonymous functions. This is when you declare a function that does not have a name. This function can be either living inside of a variable or passed as an argument to another function. They behave the same way as normal functions, but the syntax is slightly different. In this example, we are storing the function inside of the variable here that we are using later on to call the function. The function is defined with the function keyword and followed by the parentheses where we specify the arguments. And then inside of the curly brackets, we specify the code that we want to execute. The syntax, as you can see, is similar to a normal function. However, because technically this is a variable, you will need to specify the semicolon at the end of the declaration. And because of the function is anonymous, as the name says, it doesn't require a naming. As you can see, we have the result. This is an anonymous function, which is basically the call of this function, which is printing the value that is being given as an argument. And because this type of function can be stored as a variable, it means that we can also pass it as an argument to another function. In here, we are calling this function, which is taking one argument that we assume is going to be a callback function. And as an argument, we are specifying the function that we defined here, which in the end is going to call the anonymous function with a custom argument. And as you can see, it's saying call from a function. This feature makes programming very flexible and suitable for many cases and scenarios that we may encounter while solving problems. Now it's time to practice what we have learned so far. This exercise is going to be a little bit challenging, so do not worry if you can't find the solution on your first try. The important thing here is that you give it a thought and understand what we are trying to achieve. Let's imagine that we are making an application that goes through a family tree and shows the information of each member of the family. As we know, a family tree is composed of branches, where each branch of the family is composed by at least one person and maybe a partner, and then 0 or more children, which they at the same time can have one partner and then more children. Our program is going to receive this data structure as an input, and we will need to write some code to show all this data to the user, from the very first family member to the last one. This is the data structure that we're going to be using. As you can see, this is a very long combination of associative arrays that contain other arrays and goes on and on very deeply into the family tree. What I would like you to do is to print all the information regarding each family and its offspring, using only the print family tree function stated below here. You will need to declare the function with that exact name and just one argument, which is going to be the family tree array input that we declared over here. I am not expecting you to go through all the family trees manually, but rather to find out how you can make it to go through by itself without specifying each branch of each family tree. This is what the end result of the exercise is going to look like. As you can see, it's going from the very first family, which is Egbert and Redburger, and showing the particular offspring of that family, which in this case, it's the family 2, which is Aethelwulf. We are just showing the first member because assumingly it's going to be the children of that family, and the member 2 is going to be the partner of that member. After printing the offspring of that particular family, we are going inside of that family, which is Aethelwulf and Osburga, and then showing the offspring of that family. As you can see, it has 3 families as offspring, and they are Aethelred, Alfred, and Athelstan. Then we are going individual to each offspring, showing the offspring of that family as well, and then going inside of the offspring. And when there is no more offspring to be shown, we are going to just step out of it and go to the next family member. And the same is going to happen over and over until there is no more offspring to show, and there is no more family members to show either. And then the application will stop there. Pause the video now if you want to give it a try, and we will give it a go in a couple of minutes. Okay, let's try to solve the problem. The first thing that we need to do is to declare the function that is going to take one argument, which is going to be an array. And the next thing that we are going to do is to print the name of the family, which is going to be the member 1 plus the member 2. Now, the next thing that we need to do is to check if the family that we have been given has offsprings or not. We can check this with the empty method that will return true or false if the family contains offspring or not. There are some families here that contain empty arrays, which means that they don't have an offspring. Okay, and then let's do the else case, where we will specify that the family offspring does not contain any. In the case that the family has an offspring, we will need to go through each member of the offspring. And to make things clear, let's do a first pass where we will print the name of the first member of the offspring, as we know that the first member is the children of the previous family. So we will print it over here. And now here is the tricky part, because we are limited to use only this function. We are going to use one thing that is called recursive. It means that this function is going to call itself and go recursively through all the members of its family. And we can do it by just calling it again. We do the for each again for each member of the offspring, and then we just call the same function again, which will be doing the same code over and over until there is no offspring remaining. It means that the first family, that is the family 1, has an offspring that has the family 2. The family 2 has an offspring of the family 3, 4, and 5. Then it will go to the family 3, which is this one. And then it will go to the family 6, which is this one. and then the family 6 doesn't have any offspring, so it will go back again to this one, and this one doesn't have any more offspring, so it will go one step back again and go to the family 4, which is this one, which has the family 7. The family 7 doesn't have any offspring, then it will go back to the family 8. It doesn't have any offspring again, so it will go back. This one doesn't have any more offspring, so it will go back again, and then this one will go to the family 5, which will go to this one, which doesn't have offspring. That is the code loop that is going to hopefully execute. So let's take a look here, and it looks like it is correct. So as we can see here, the first family, it's family of Ekberg and Redburga, which the offspring is Aetherwolf. And the second family is Aetherwolf and Osburga, with offspring being Aethelred, which is here, Alfred, and Athelstan. Then the family of Aethelred has one offspring, which is Aetherwold. Then the family of Aetherwold doesn't have a member 2, which is correct, and then it doesn't have offspring either. Then we go back again, and we go to the family of Alfred, which has 2 offsprings, which is Edward and Athelflaed. And they don't have offspring again, so it will say offspring none, and then it will go back again to the family of Aetherwolf and go to Athelstan, which it doesn't have any offspring. So we have properly gone through the family tree from the very beginning to the end just by calling the function once, and then the function will call itself as many times as it requires, as long as there is offspring remaining. This is a very useful code design that is used in many cases and scenarios when you want to simplify the code and don't want to repeat it over and over. But don't worry if you didn't have it for the first time, because this is a more advanced programming design. But it is good that you know this and get used to this code design and implement it in the future if you feel like it. Okay, this is the end of today's lesson. In the next video, we will take a look at how to implement classes and go to another code design called object-oriented programming, which is a code design that is very used in the programming industry. Thank you for staying until the end, and please subscribe to the channel and give a like if you like the content. Let me know in the comment section if you have any questions or suggestions. See you on the next video.